Imagine for a moment that the overwhelming period you are currently labeling as a crisis is, in reality, the most meticulously orchestrated event of your entire existence. Consider that it is absolutely not a tragic misfortune, not a cosmic penalty, nor is it proof that you made the wrong choices, began too late, or simply lack what it takes to build the life you once envisioned. Instead, what if this intense experience is actually a deeply profound mechanism, a highly specific, entirely predictable, and universally repeated sequence of internal transformations that every single individual who has ever managed to perceive the world in a profoundly different way has had to endure? There are absolutely no exceptions to this rule, no hidden shortcuts to take, and no possible way to bypass the required phases. The renowned theoretical physicist David Bohm dedicated 4 decades of his life to demonstrating this exact phenomenon. He did not approach this as a philosopher offering soothing words, but rather with the unrelenting, mathematical rigor of a scientist documenting how human perception structurally evolves within the complex architecture of the mind. Bohm was unarguably one of the most brilliant and exact scientific minds of the 20th century. Serving as Albert Einstein's contemporary at Princeton University, he formulated an interpretation of quantum mechanics that still stands today as the most mathematically robust alternative to our standard model. This was a man completely uninterested in offering empty comfort or psychological reframing. His sole objective was to chart reality with absolute precision, and his ultimate conclusion was stark. Before true clarity can emerge, a fundamental breaking must occur. This shattering unfolds across a very specific 5-stage trajectory. The characteristics of each phase are so distinctly recognizable that, as they are detailed, you will inevitably identify exactly where you are standing right now, or you will pinpoint the exact past era of your life that ultimately shattered to make room for your current reality. Consider this script, your personal map. I strongly urge you to stick around at least until the 4th stage, because that is the exact pivotal moment where this information ceases to be mere intellectual curiosity and transforms into an undeniable mirror reflecting your own existence. Let us begin with the first phase. It starts with a profound, bone-deep weariness, a specific breed of exhaustion that absolutely no amount of sleep, rest, or vacation can cure. You are likely deeply familiar with this sensation. It is not the ordinary physical tiredness born from a heavy workload. Rather, it is the intense, soul-draining fatigue that comes from perpetually acting out a version of yourself that your core intelligence has already silently recognized as obsolete. On the outside, you continue to function. You show up to work, you meet your deadlines, and you perfectly execute the persona that society and your loved ones rely on. The dependable anchor, the highly capable professional, the person who always keeps everything perfectly aligned. However, beneath this flawless exterior performance, a fundamental disengagement has occurred. The natural, spontaneous drive you once possessed has vanished, forcing you to artificially manufacture your motivation day after day, with the psychological toll growing heavier with every passing morning. In his precise terminology, David Bohm referred to this state as the exhaustion of the explicating function. He described the tangible, everyday reality we interact with the world we can easily label, see, and touch as the explicate order. Operating within this superficial layer of existence demands a massive amount of cognitive upkeep. It requires you to continuously run an outdated mental operating system, forcing you to believe the exact same narratives about your identity, your limitations, and your supposed desires. The critical issue is that this particular software was programmed by a much younger, less evolved version of yourself, designed for an environment and a set of circumstances that have long since vanished. When this obsolete system inevitably begins to glitch, when maintaining the illusion drains vastly more energy than it could ever possibly generate, your mind and body issue a glaring warning sign. The tricky part is that this warning mechanism rarely feels like a stroke of profound enlightenment. Instead, it feels indistinguishable from a total life collapse. The professional path that formerly provided you with a robust sense of purpose suddenly feels like a suffocating, ill-fitting theatrical costume belonging to a stranger. Interpersonal connections that once felt vibrant and necessary now weigh heavily upon you as baffling obligations, leaving you wondering why you continue to sustain them. The grand ambitions that used to propel you out of bed every morning now merely occupy your thoughts like a mundane shopping list created for a dinner party you desperately wish to cancel. And perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this ordeal isn't the internal emptiness itself, but the sheer inability to articulate it to anyone else. From an external perspective, everything appears flawless. By all conventional metrics of success, your life is a triumph. Yet, deep within the hidden corridors of your psyche, you have silently filed for spiritual and emotional bankruptcy. It is not a loud, dramatic explosion that easily justifies a life crisis to onlookers. Rather, it is a quiet, solitary retraction of your soul's investment in a life structure that everyone else still perceives as completely functional. Bohm comprehended this deeply because he endured it firsthand. During the intense political climate of the early 1950s, he was summoned before the House Un-American Activities Committee in Washington, D.C. He staunchly refused to testify, a decision that cost him his prestigious tenure at Princeton and effectively banished him from the mainstream American scientific community. Everything that defined him, his career, his reputation, his entire professional ecosystem, was completely obliterated. Crucially, he did not merely pivot to rebuild a slightly altered replica of his former existence. He allowed the total collapse to fully run its course, relocating first to Brazil and eventually settling in England. He spent the subsequent decades meticulously constructing a revolutionary new paradigm for comprehending the universe, a vastly expanded vision that his previous academic confines could never have accommodated. For Bohm, the destruction of his established world was not an unfortunate pause in his life's mission. It was the absolute prerequisite for his true work to commence. Therefore, the essential takeaway I want you to internalize regarding this first stage is this. The profound lethargy and emptiness you are currently battling are not signs of a personal malfunction or a broken mind. They are, in fact, an urgent transmission from a much deeper layer of your awareness, firmly notifying you that the superficial architecture of your current life has exhausted its utility and can take you no further. The illusion of the map, that previous framework carried you to its absolute limits, functioning exactly as it was engineered to do, and its journey is now officially over. This doesn't mean you are finished. It simply means the specific blueprint you relied on to navigate your existence has expired. The vast landscape of your life stretches onward, but your old map has been rendered utterly useless. Immediately following this internal bankruptcy arrives a secondary phase that is quieter, yet in many respects, significantly more agonizing. The overarching storyline you've confidently recited about who you are begins to fracture. These aren't sudden realizations of falsehoods, but rather profound, echoing voids. Explanations that once fit your reality like a glove now leave vast, uncomfortable spaces between your logic and your actual lived experience. Your deeply held justifications for your identity, your past traumas, your upward trajectory, and the sheer logic of your existence suddenly feel like a fragile house of cards. You realize this structure was erected on blind assumptions you never paused to question, primarily because, until this moment, you never had to. But now, it is mandatory. The Thinker and the System. In 1992, David Bohm penned what might arguably be the single most profound realization of his entire career. He stated, "Thought is a system, and as a system, it includes the thinker." Take a moment to truly digest the weight of that concept. You are not an objective bystander wielding your intellect like a magnifying glass to examine the world around you. Instead, you are inextricably woven into a cognitive matrix that is constantly fabricating your perception of reality, while simultaneously judging that very perception through the exact same matrix that created it. The prisoner, the judge, and the jury are all the identical entity, and remarkably, none of them realize they are locked inside the same room. This concept carries a devastatingly precise implication for the unraveling you are currently experiencing. The identity breaking apart right now isn't merely a fairy tale you told yourself for comfort. It is the very cornea of your psychological eye. When that lens begins to fog, your vision doesn't just slightly shift, it temporarily vanishes altogether. For a uniquely agonizing and hard-to-articulate duration, utter clarity becomes an impossibility. The previous sharp focus is obliterated, and the new paradigm has yet to materialize. During this chaotic transition, friends and family will inevitably look at you and remark that you seem lost, and they are entirely correct. However, this isn't the aimless wandering of someone who lacks a destination. It is the profound disorientation of an explorer whose trusted map has suddenly become unreadable text. The physical ground beneath their feet remains unaltered. It is merely their cognitive capacity to decipher the old coordinates that has completely melted away, taking their foundational assumptions down with it. The trap of trying to fix it. I can speak to the visceral reality of this from the inside out, because I drowned in this exact, confusing phase for nearly 2 long years before finally grasping its mechanics. Every metric that previously grounded my reality, my firm career definition, my sense of forward momentum, my deep-seated belief in the ultimate purpose of my daily grind, grew incredibly permeable. I didn't feel that my path was inherently wrong, but rather that it lacked structural integrity. The foundation felt flimsy, constructed from materials far less solid than I had naively assumed. Consequently, I fell into the exact same trap that ensnares nearly everyone at this juncture. I frantically tried to repair the damage. I strategized obsessively. I hunted relentlessly for sudden clarifying epiphanies. I exhausted myself in endless conversations, hoping to rebuild my shattered narrative from external validation inward. Yet, every single frantic effort to resurrect my former certainty only accelerated the disintegration. Why? Because the intellectual wrench I was trying to use to tighten the bolts was made of the exact same dissolving material as the broken machine itself. Boehm's framework perfectly diagnoses this trap. The cognitive apparatus currently enduring this breakdown is fundamentally incapable of engineering its own rescue. You simply cannot strategize your way out of a developmental phase whose sole, mandated objective is the absolute destruction of that specific method of strategizing. This profound unraveling does not demand a clever fix or an action plan from you. It demands something far more excruciating: surrender. It requires you to step back and let the collapse run its full course. You must deliberately abandon the urge to forcefully caulk the newly formed cracks or rationalize the emptiness away. You have to permit your internal narrative to become incredibly fragile and full of holes, because it is only through that newfound permeability that a vastly more expansive, nuanced understanding of your existence can finally seep in a reading of your life that your old, rigid story would never have permitted. The dense silence. Once the bankruptcy is finalized and the unraveling settles, you are met with a profound silence. But crucially, this is not the hollow silence of having a blank mind. It isn't the quiet of being paralyzed, drained, or devoid of inspiration. It is a completely different species of quiet, one that is thick, highly textured, and pulsating with far more vitality than the chaotic mental static that preceded it. If you have ever crossed into this territory, you will immediately recognize what I mean. The relentless, exhausting inner commentator that historically micromanaged your every waking moment. The endless, cyclical loops of forecasting, analyzing, fretting, and plotting mysteriously powers down. This doesn't happen because you've magically attained total inner peace, but because a monumental shift is occurring at a frequency far too deep and foundational for your noisy, habituated surface mind to detect. Boehm dedicated years to closely observing this exact caliber of silence within his structured dialogue circles group experiments he meticulously designed to push the boundaries of what collective human perception could achieve. He documented a flawless, recurring pattern. Right before a group birthed a truly unprecedented insight, not just rehashing old concepts, but achieving a completely alien and deeply accurate interpretation of reality, the room would invariably fall into this heavy, pregnant stillness. He characterized it as the collective consciousness tuning into its own depths, listening harder than it ever had before. This translates perfectly to the individual psyche. Without fail, just before your perceptual horizons radically expand, the volume of your superficial anxieties is sharply muted, allowing the powerful, undeniable frequency of a deeper, underlying order to finally roar to life. The implicate order and the architecture of silence. Let us explore exactly how David Bohm conceptualized the mechanics behind this profound, heavy stillness. Beneath the easily observable, tangible reality, the superficial layer of existence that we can label, measure, and manipulate, which he categorized as the explicate order, exists a vastly more profound, hidden dimension. He named this the implicate order. Imagine it as an infinitely dense, folded matrix of pure potentiality, from which our everyday visible world is constantly being born. Think of a massive wave swelling from the lightless, unseen depths of the ocean. It rises, temporarily asserts its physical form on the surface, and ultimately dissolves back into the deep, in much the same way. Every single revelation, relationship, or paradigm shift that will eventually materialize in your life already resides within this implicate order. It is intensely real, but it remains folded inward, invisible to the naked eye. Crucially, it is not waiting for you to exert more agonizing, white-knuckled effort. Rather, it is waiting for you to cultivate the precise atmospheric conditions of receptivity required for it to naturally unfurl. The heavy silence you experience in the third stage is actually the acoustic signature of those exact conditions locking into place. You are suspended in a liminal void, the highly uncomfortable parenthesis between a defunct paradigm that can no longer carry your weight and a nascent perception that hasn't quite crystallized enough to take its place. Within this suspended animation, if you can somehow muster the psychological endurance to simply stay there resisting the desperate, frantic urge to plug the emptiness with the nearest accessible distraction, that deeper, hidden order will gradually ascend to the surface. Tragically, the vast majority of human beings absolutely cannot tolerate this quiet. The sheer terror of possessing no coherent storyline, lacking a concrete compass heading, and having no rational elevator pitch to explain their current state of being becomes psychologically unbearable. Consequently, they panic. They frantically grasp at anything that will mimic the sensation of certainty, a hastily constructed life plan, a superficial new persona, or a fresh set of goals constructed entirely from the bankrupt vocabulary of their old mental software. The moment they do this, the silence shatters, and the door closes before the transformative work is finished. Proprioception of thought. Surviving this transitional phase demands a radical capacity to inhabit empty space, a skill that violently contradicts everything modern society has programmed you to value. You have been conditioned since childhood to worship productivity, swift momentum, crystal clear direction, and unwavering purpose. While those traits are undeniably virtuous in ordinary circumstances, deploying them within this specific crucible will only sabotage your metamorphosis. Bohm coined a brilliant phrase for the exact caliber of mental discipline this moment necessitates: proprioception of thought. This is the rare, highly acquired ability to consciously observe the machinery of your own mind operating in real time, without becoming hypnotized or hijacked by its output. It is the practice of catching yourself the very split second your brain scrambles for a premature resolution. It is noticing the visceral, bodily itch to shatter the uncomfortable silence with a forced answer, and consciously choosing to let that impulse wash over you. You don't have to hold out forever, just long enough for the massive, formless truths incubating beneath the quiet to finally breach the surface and become completely legible. Stage 4. The pressure of the two. Small coat. Which brings us to the precise juncture I urged you to wait for. Welcome to Stage 4. This is the phase that almost everyone misinterprets as an agonizing disaster, yet it is actually the most magnificent indicator of an imminent breakthrough. When a massive paradigm shift within the implicate order has been brewing for an extended period, when the heavy silence has thoroughly cleared the debris, and the new reality is practically bursting at the seams of your consciousness, an immense psychological pressure begins to build. You will experience this as an intense, unplaceable restlessness that seemingly lacks a clear target. Do not confuse this with ambition. You know what ambition tastes like, and this is entirely different. Nor is it mere anxiety, although it disguises itself in anxiety's wardrobe so convincingly that it is frequently misdiagnosed. Instead, it feels maddeningly akin to having a crucial word trapped on the very tip of your tongue, just out of cognitive reach. Something colossal is hovering right at the edge of your peripheral vision, almost definable, almost ready to be spoken into existence, and it is forcefully pressing outward against the restrictive boundaries of your current life. Suddenly, your old existence feels objectively, suffocatingly small. This isn't a petty grievance or a lack of gratitude on your part. It is a stark, physical reality. It is exactly like trying to squeeze into a winter coat that is 3 sizes too small. Regardless of how deeply thankful you are that the coat kept you warm during past winters, it physically cannot accommodate your current dimensions. The trap of the in-between. Yet, the new life hasn't entirely manifested. You are trapped in the purgatory of the in-between, the treacherous corridor separating the expired explicate order from the newly arriving one. Bohm was remarkably adamant about this specific threshold. It is the most vital, yet most easily sabotaged, stage of the entire sequence. Under the agonizing weight of this pressure, human nature defaults to 2 primary defense mechanisms, both of which instantly abort the miraculous unfolding. The first trap is to force the issue. This looks like prematurely dictating what your new revelation should be, and aggressively manufacturing it through sheer willpower. You hastily erect a new narrative directly on top of the rubble of the old one before the demolition is even complete. The devastating result is never a genuinely expanded level of consciousness, but merely a superficial renovation of your old prison cell. You slap a fresh coat of paint and some new vocabulary onto the exact same confining walls. The second, equally tragic trap is to retreat. Overwhelmed by the intense pressure, you erroneously conclude that something is catastrophically wrong with you. You use that fear as justification to crawl back into the cramped, familiar, and highly manageable confines of your previous identity. It doesn't fit anymore, and wearing it will ache, but it offers the hollow comfort of familiarity. It is recognizable. Both of these panicked reactions are profoundly human and deeply sympathetic, yet they are the exact mechanisms that trap brilliant individuals in the exact same looping layer of reality for years, decades, or even an entire lifetime. People waste their whole existence oscillating wildly between forcing a synthetic new chapter and retreating into a dead past simply because they refuse to withstand the pressure long enough for the authentic unfolding to finish its labor. Choiceless awareness. The antidote to this endless loop, as Bohm beautifully articulated, is a state of choiceless awareness. This is absolutely not a stance of lazy passivity or resignation. Rather, it is a state of hyper-engaged presence. It means remaining fiercely connected to whatever is dismantling you, without stubbornly trying to dictate the final script in advance. Imagine stepping into the role of someone who is fully participating in a theatrical production, but has gracefully surrendered the director's chair. Your internal posture must become like an open, upturned hand. You are neither aggressively grasping for a predetermined, desired outcome, nor clenching your fist in terror against what you fear might arrive. You remain entirely open, entirely present, fully capable of receiving whatever magnificent truth the deeper order is finally prepared to place within your grasp. The purpose of the pressure. If you find yourself currently trapped in this exact phase, if the psychological weight has been compounding for a duration that feels profoundly unfair, and if your former life architecture appears entirely defunct while your next chapter remains stubbornly out of sight, I need to speak directly to you. That mounting pressure is absolutely not an indication that you are somehow failing this transformation. Rather, it is the ultimate confirmation that a profound mechanism is actively working at a subterranean level. a depth completely obscured from your current vantage point. The implicate order does not waste energy generating pressure within a system that is unprepared. It strictly applies this immense tension to systems that are perfectly primed. It strikes precisely when the necessary atmospheric conditions for an authentic breakthrough have finally coalesced. At this point, the only missing ingredient is the caliber of your attention, which will ultimately permit the revelation to breach the surface. A necessary interruption, the navigational tool. Now, right here at this specific juncture of our journey, just before we cross the threshold into the fifth and final stage, I must hit the pause button. I am not doing this to aggressively pitch a product, but because it would be a profound disservice to meticulously map out this agonizing phase and then abandon you without the exact lifeline I desperately craved when I was drowning in it myself, when I was agonizingly suspended in stage 4, crushed by the pressure, stranded in the liminal void, with my old operating system dead and the new one nowhere to be found. I didn't require more fleeting motivational quotes. I was already swimming in superficial inspiration. What I genuinely required was a highly accurate cartography. I needed a guide that explicitly stated, here is the raw reality of your situation. Here is the specific behavior this exact moment demands of you. And here are the exact missteps that will instantaneously derail your progress if you panic. Because that precise navigational tool did not exist, I was forced to engineer it from scratch. The Quantum Transition Field Guide is the culmination of 2 grueling years spent traversing this exact sequence, meticulously documenting its architecture so that it could serve as a profoundly practical asset. This was not written for a casual observer on the sidelines. It was engineered specifically for the person currently suffocating in the trenches of stage 3 or 4. It is for the individual who looks at every new development and cannot distinguish between a green light to push forward and a red light warning them to retreat, because the sheer confusion makes both look identical. This guide decodes all 5 phases. It translates the visceral, internal experience of each step, outlines the mandatory requirements for success, highlights the subtle maneuvers that protect your evolution, and exposes the silent errors that will assassinate your growth before you even realize you've made a mistake. If the intense reality I am outlining in this video reflects your actual lived experience right now, not just as an abstract philosophical debate, but as the concrete reality of your typical Tuesday morning, you will find this resource linked in the description below. It will patiently wait there for you after we discuss stage 5. However, I felt it was crucial to inform you of its existence before we proceed, primarily because stage 5 will radically alter how you interpret every single phase that preceded it. Entering that final revelation equipped with the correct map transforms the entire ordeal compared to stumbling into it completely blind. Stage 5. The reorganization of reality. Returning to Bohm, he adamantly refused to label the aftermath of this process as a final destination. Operating with the brilliant, unsentimental logic of a physicist, he understood deeply that complex systems never truly arrive. Instead, they continually reorganize. They unfold into a highly upgraded configuration, granting the observer access to an entirely novel stratum of reality, a new plateau from which, inevitably, the next evolution of tension will eventually sprout. Rather than calling it an arrival, Bohm characterized this climax as a fundamental mutation within the explicating function itself. You are not simply downloading new data into a malfunctioning, outdated hard drive. You have acquired a radically upgraded perceptual apparatus. It is an entirely unprecedented method by which the surface layer of your consciousness translates the profound frequencies broadcasting from the deeper order. You will walk through the exact same physical world, yet exponentially more of it will be illuminated. You will inhabit the exact same life, but you will instantly access rich layers of meaning and nuance that your previous cognitive resolution was simply too pixelated to detect. Suddenly, the historical timeline of your pain is radically reframed. The heavy grief you dragged around for years was actually containing encrypted data about the exact wisdom you were inherently designed to master. The relentless obstacles and friction you continuously smashed into were actively carving out the precise silhouette of the strength you needed to forge. That devastating bankruptcy we discussed back in stage 1, it was merely the deeper order's brilliant strategy for violently reclaiming your wasted energy. Energy that was foolishly trapped in maintaining an identity that had become far too claustrophobic for the massive potential incubating underneath. Absolutely none of it was arbitrary. 0% of it was a cosmic punishment. Every single excruciating moment was simply the implicate order aggressively fighting its way toward the light, utilizing the only viable strategy at its disposal, the systematic, progressive erosion of your rigid surface structures until your defenses were soft enough to let the monumental truth burst through. Once you cross the threshold of stage 5, you will glance backward at this entire harrowing sequence with an emotion that lacks a precise translation in the English language. It isn't strictly gratitude, although deep thankfulness is certainly woven into it. The epiphany of recognition. Rather, the sensation you experience after crossing that final threshold is much closer to a profound, undeniable recognition. It is the exact, striking epiphany you feel when your eyes finally lock onto a cleverly concealed face, masterfully camouflaged within a complex painting. You find yourself utterly bewildered that you could have stared at the very same canvas countless times without ever perceiving what was blatantly present the entire time. And why? Because it was unequivocally there from the very beginning. It was quietly folded inward, patiently residing within the implicate order of your personal existence, merely awaiting the precise atmospheric conditions of your perception that would finally permit its grand unveiling. You were never running late to your own life. You were absolutely not failing. You were not lagging behind your peers. Instead, you were simply progressing through a highly structured sequence. You were navigating a specific, biologically and psychologically definable progression of internal metamorphoses, an unavoidable path that every single individual who has ever attained a radically transformed worldview has been forced to walk. You were always precisely positioned at the exact coordinate within that sequence where you fundamentally needed to be. Boehm's final question. Consider the poignant reality of David Boehm's final hours. On the 27th of October 1992, the very last day he walked this earth, he hosted one of his signature dialogue groups in London. Witnesses who attended that specific gathering recalled that he was more vibrantly present in that exchange than he had been in several months. He appeared luminous, extraordinarily alive, and fiercely, sharply attentive to the room. Just a few short hours after that session concluded, he suffered a fatal heart attack. He passed away without ever pinning down an ultimate, definitive resolution to the monumental query that had consumed 4 decades of his relentless intellect. Yet, right up to his dying breath, he remained profoundly skeptical of any final answers. He firmly maintained that a question left breathing and wide open is infinitely more fertile and generative than a question prematurely sealed with a rigid, arrogant conclusion. The paramount question he was still actively wrestling with as his time ran out was this: what is the exact dynamic between the entity observing reality and the reality being observed? Dropping your pin on the map, as we bring this journey to a close, I want to present you with a deeply personalized variation of that very same inquiry. Honestly, ask yourself, which of these 5 distinct stages are you currently inhabiting right now? Do not choose the phase that forms the most romantic or dramatic narrative, nor the one your ego desperately wishes you were in. Which specific stage is undeniably weaving itself into the gritty texture of your everyday reality? Which one accurately matches the distinct flavor of the exhaustion, the heavy stillness, or the excruciating psychological pressure you have been lugging around? Uncovering that honest answer is arguably the most profoundly useful tool you can extract from our time together today. It will not necessarily hand you a crystal-clear roadmap to your final destination, but it will vividly illuminate exactly what this current, challenging moment is demanding of you, and that razor-sharp specificity, that flawless alignment between the reality of your circumstances and the behavioral response it necessitates, is the exact spark that ignites true transformation. The shift invariably originates right there. Boehm guaranteed it. And when it came to mapping this intricate psychological terrain, Bohm was more accurate than virtually any other thinker in human history. Before you go, I invite you to leave a comment below stating which of the 5 stages you are currently navigating. Do not post this as a bold declaration of identity, but rather as dropping a pin on a map to mark your current coordinates. Because when a critical mass of individuals courageously and honestly shares their location, this comment section transforms into a phenomenon that David Bohm himself would have instantly recognized: a collective, collaborative sanctuary, where the vast implicate order is granted the necessary room to finally surface a miraculous emergence that simply cannot occur when we remain trapped inside the isolation of our own solitary minds.